We voted Alice should stay home. That was my mom's message, asking me to keep my daughter at home on my sister's wedding day. Her reason? She feared Alice would embarrass the family because of the unusual spots and shapes on her face. Faced with such an unreasonable request, I had no choice but to stand up for my daughter. Let me tell you how I did it. Standing up and protecting my little girl. Hello, everyone. I'm Kaylee, 32 years old. My husband Donald, our 5-year-old daughter Alice, and I are living peacefully in a small house in Los Angeles. 3 months ago, to protect my daughter, I had to sell the first house I bought back in Portland, Oregon. That old Victorian wasn't just a place to live. It symbolized the early dream Donald and I shared when we first got married. It was where Alice took her first steps, a treasure chest of memories for our little family. But I let it go. No matter how full it was with memories, I didn't want my daughter growing up under the influence of the people we once called family. People I had believed would love Alice the way I do. It all started with a minor disagreement at my sister Amelia's wedding. At the time, I thought it was just one of those common family misunderstandings that would pass. But what I thought was minor turned out to be the line between silently accepting cruelty, masked as family, and standing up to protect my child at all costs. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes love means cutting ties. To help you better understand my story, let me take you back 2 weeks before my sister's wedding. It was a Sunday. I was driving from Portland to my parents' home in Woodburn, Oregon. The drive usually took about 40 minutes, but that day, something felt different. Maybe it was the urgent call from my mom 2 days earlier, insisting I be there for the weekend. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed both of my sister's cars, Amelia's and Audrey's, were parked in the driveway. As soon as I stepped into the living room, I could feel the buzz of excitement in the air. My mom, Margaret, was sitting in her favorite armchair, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. My dad, Robert, stood by the window, looking out over the garden, holding a cup of coffee. Amelia was sitting on the sofa, and something about her smile made me uneasy. Audrey, the youngest of us, was perched on the cushion seat near the window, her laptop, as usual, never far from reach. The moment I walked in, Amelia jumped up with a bright smile and announced to everyone, "Now that Kaylee's here, I can finally share the good news." Right then, I knew this was going to be about Amelia. With visible excitement, she took a deep breath and told us, "David and I are getting married in 2 weeks. We've planned a big wedding." The living room instantly burst into applause and congratulations. My mom got up and hugged Amelia tightly. My dad nodded with approval and smiled. Even Audrey closed her laptop to celebrate her sister's announcement. Once the excitement had settled, Amelia turned to me with expectant eyes and said, "Kaylee, there's something I'd like to ask you." A chill ran down my spine. I'd learned over the years that whenever Amelia started a sentence with, "I'd like to ask you something," it usually meant something complicated was coming. I looked at her and asked cautiously, "What is it?" She sat beside me on the sofa, her tone shifting to something more serious. "I know Michael, your best friend, owns the Golden Oak, one of the top 5-star restaurants in Portland. David and I want to have our wedding reception there." I nodded slowly, waiting for the other shoe to drop. When I didn't respond immediately, she continued, "Can you help us book it?" Before I could say anything, my mom jumped in, her voice full of hope. "Kaylee, this is your chance to help the family. I'm sure Michael would do it for you." My dad nodded in agreement. "You two are such close friends. I'm sure he'd give the family a discount, right, Kaylee?" That's when I began to understand what was being asked. This wasn't just about helping them book the venue. They were expecting me to leverage my friendship with Michael for special treatment. Amelia looked at me with pleading eyes and added, "I heard those places offer discounts for family and friends. Maybe 30% isn't too much to ask from Michael." I felt pressure from all sides. My parents were looking at me with hopeful expressions. Amelia was glowing with wedding excitement. Even Audrey, though quiet until now, followed the conversation. She finally spoke up to support her sister. "Come on, Kaylee. Michael's your best friend. I'm sure he'll be happy to help the family." In that living room, I felt like I was being pulled into something I wasn't entirely comfortable with. Michael and I had been close since college and had over a decade of solid friendship, but asking him for a commercial favor like this, that crossed a line I wasn't used to crossing. Sensing my hesitation, my dad added, "All you need to do is ask, Kaylee. If Michael can't help, then that's fine. But how would you know if you don't even ask?" In the end, not wanting to ruin the joyful mood of the gathering, and overwhelmed by the pressure, I let out a quiet sigh and agreed to Amelia's request. Immediately, she clapped in excitement and threw her arms around me. Thank you. I knew you'd come through for me. My mom smiled satisfactorily and said to everyone, That's settled. Our family always pulls together like this. After agreeing to help, we chatted for about 10 more minutes before I said my goodbyes and left. I couldn't stop thinking about what they asked me during the drive back. That night, after returning to our home in Portland, I sat quietly in my study. Alice, our 5-year-old daughter, was fast asleep in her room, surrounded by stuffed animals and colorful drawings. With a mix of reluctance and family loyalty, I picked up the phone and called Michael. The phone rang a few times before I heard his familiar voice. Kylie, what's up? Calling kind of late, aren't you? He chirped. I gave a half-hearted chuckle and replied, Hey, Michael, I need a favor. His tone shifted right away. Go ahead, I'm listening. I told him about Amelia's wedding and how my family hoped to host the reception at the Golden Oak. I tried to keep things neutral, avoiding putting too much weight on the discount they were quietly hoping for. After I finished explaining, there was a brief silence on the line. Then Michael said, Kaylee, you know I'm always willing to help a friend. Booking the place, no problem. I'll make it happen for your sister. As for the price... He paused for a moment, then continued. I get it. Weddings aren't cheap. So instead of the 30% your family was hoping for, I'll take 40% off the total bill. Call it a wedding gift from me to your sister. In that moment, I felt a rush of gratitude mixed with unease. Michael had exceeded what my family expected, but it also meant I owed my best friend a serious favor. I thanked him sincerely and said, Michael, I don't know what to say. You're being incredibly generous. He laughed and said, Don't overthink it, Kaylee. That's what friends are for. As long as your family's happy, I'm good. After we hung up, I stayed in my chair for another 30 minutes, lost in thought, replaying everything about helping my family. Right after dropping Alice off at preschool the next morning, I called Amelia. The phone barely rang twice before she picked up. Kaylee, any news from Michael? She asked, her voice practically buzzing with anticipation. I smiled and gave her the update. Good news. Michael not only agreed to host the reception, he's giving you a 40% discount instead of the 30% we were hoping for. There was a beat of silence on the line, then Amelia screamed joyfully. Oh my God, really? 40%? Kaylee, you're amazing. In the background, I could hear David, her fiancé, asking what was happening. Amelia excitedly repeated the news, and I could hear them laughing and celebrating. On the call, Amelia said with genuine gratitude, You have no idea how happy this makes me. We've been so stressed about costs for weeks. With this discount, our wedding is going to be perfect. Hearing her happiness made me feel good about helping her, but I reminded her gently, Just remember, Michael is doing this as a special favor to our family. We need to be respectful and truly grateful. Of course, she replied quickly. I'll write him a thank you card today. We chatted for a few more minutes about the wedding details. Amelia described the dress she had picked, the flower arrangements, and their guest list of about 80 people. It all sounded like the dream wedding she had been planning for a long time. But her tone shifted just as I was about to wrap up the call. Kaylee, there's one more thing I wanted to talk to you about. That uneasy feeling returned instantly. I asked cautiously, What is it? There was a pause. Then she said hesitantly, It's just... David and I are going through a bit of a rough patch financially. He just started a new job, and I'm waiting on a raise. Even with the discount, the wedding's still a huge expense. I already had a good idea where this was going, but I asked anyway, What are you trying to say? After another moment of silence, Amelia took a deep breath. I know this is a big ask, but do you think you could front the reception cost for us? Once things settle after the wedding, David and I will pay you back. It felt like a bucket of cold water had just been dumped over my head. Even with the discount, a wedding at the Golden Oak would still cost $15,000 to $20,000. I paused, then replied, Honestly, I get where you're coming from, but that's a lot of money. I have my responsibilities, my family to care for. Amelia's voice turned pleading. You know I'd never ask for money without a good reason. This is our wedding, this once in a lifetime. David and I really will pay you back. I responded gently but clearly. Do you remember that 10 grand you borrowed from me 2 years ago? Silence. Heavy, awkward silence. 2 years ago, Amelia had approached me with a can't-miss cryptocurrency investment tip from a friend. She needed $10,000 and promised to double it within 6 months. I gave it to her out of trust and sibling loyalty. No paperwork, no conditions. The market crashed. She lost everything, and the debt was never repaid. She snapped when I said, Why are you bringing that up? I told you I'd pay you back when I could. I answered firmly, I'm not a bank. The money I earn is for my family, for Alice's future. I can't keep fronting big expenses or risky ventures without accountability. There was a long, cold pause before Amelia finally said, I get it. You don't want to help me. I'll figure it out myself. And then she hung up. I sat in my study, staring at the silent phone, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. Part of me wanted to support my sister on her big day, but the other part knew I couldn't keep being the family ATM, especially with no guarantee that anyone would take responsibility for what they owed. And deep down, I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't be long before my parents called asking for help. Just as I had feared, I was working from home the very next afternoon when I heard the doorbell ring. Looking out the window, I saw my parents' green Honda Accord and Amelia's white Toyota Camry parked in front of the house. My stomach sank. This was precisely what I had been dreading. Still sitting in the back seat, Alice was excitedly talking about her drawings from preschool, completely unaware of the storm about to hit our doorstep. When I opened the door, my mom stepped in first, her face unusually stern. My dad followed, his familiar scowl signaling his disapproval. Amelia came in last, avoiding eye contact. They sat on the sofa, and my mom was the first to speak, her tone heavy with disappointment. Kaylee, I was heartbroken when Amelia told me about your conversation yesterday. Dad jumped in immediately, his voice sharp. You refused to help your sister on the most important day of her life. That's not how a Henderson behaves. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept composure and replied, Dad, I didn't refuse to help. I just said I couldn't front that money without a clear plan to pay it back. Amelia finally spoke up, her voice tinged with resentment. You know David and I will pay you back. Why can't you trust me? I looked straight at her and said, Trust? You want to talk about trust? What about the 10 grand you borrowed from me 2 years ago? Have you forgotten about that? When I brought it up, my mom waved her hand dismissively, like she wanted to sweep it under the rug. That's different, Kaylee. This is a wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime event. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I stood up and said, Different? Mom, that was my money. The money I work hard for is to support Alice and to plan for her future. I'm not this family's bank. At that, Amelia burst into tears. I don't understand how you can be so heartless. It's my wedding, just this one time. My mom rushed to comfort her, giving me a disapproving look. Then she said, Ever since you married, you've become selfish and calculating. Those words cut deeper than I expected. I felt like I'd just been slapped. But I didn't want to escalate things in my home, so I stayed quiet, momentarily thinking through my next words. About 5 minutes later, I turned to Amelia and said plainly, I'm not stopping you from having a wedding. I'm just saying I can't pay up front. We can write up a loan agreement if you really want to borrow money. All three of them looked stunned. My mom stared at me like I had just said something unforgivable. A loan agreement? Are you serious? What kind of family writes loan agreements? I stood my ground. What kind of family keeps borrowing money and never pays it back? If Amelia truly plans to repay me, what's the problem with putting it in writing? Dad shook his head, clearly disappointed. You've lost all sense of family, Kaylee. I don't even recognize my daughter anymore. That hit me like a punch in the gut. I sat down, completely drained. After a long silence, I told them, If you want my help, these are my terms. A signed loan agreement. No interest, but with a clear repayment deadline. That's my final offer. Faced with my firmness, Amelia stood up and snapped, Fine, I'll sign your stupid paper, but don't expect me to forget this. My parents looked at me with such deep disappointment. My mom added quietly, I hope one day you'll understand that family matters more than money. After they left, I sat alone in the living room, feeling like I had just survived a war. When Donald came home and saw me like that, he asked with concern, Kaylee, what happened? I told him everything. He listened closely, occasionally squeezing my hand to comfort me. When I finished, Donald said, I think you did the right thing. No one has the right to pressure you into lending money without accountability, even if they're family. 2 days later, Amelia showed up at my house with a handwritten document. She handed it to me and said coldly, Here's the loan agreement you wanted. With no interest. I'm borrowing $20,000 to be repaid within 2 years. I looked it over, a simple document, but legally solid. I signed it and told her, Thank you for understanding. I'll transfer the money to Michael and take care of the reception booking. She didn't say anything else. She took the paper back and walked out. After finalizing the payment and booking with Michael, I sent a message to the family, letting them know everything had been arranged. The message was marked as seen, but no one replied. At that moment, I had a vague, uneasy feeling, like this wasn't over, like something else was still coming. And once again, my instincts were right. A week before Amelia's wedding, I was in my office reviewing contracts when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. I opened it without thinking much, figuring it might just be a final detail about the wedding. But what I read hit me like a bolt of lightning. The message said, "Kaylee, I'm asking that Alice stay home on the day of Amelia's wedding." It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I reread the message twice, 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood. But no. The words stared back at me, clear as day. With my hands trembling, I immediately texted my mom, asking why my daughter wasn't welcome at the wedding. Her reply was short and cold. "You know why. The whole family voted. Alice will stay home." I called her immediately. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. When I heard her voice, I asked, my voice shaky, "Can you explain why Alice isn't allowed at the wedding?" She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Alice is different. Her presence might make guests uncomfortable. Some people might be scared or uneasy looking at her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Alice, my sweet, bright, joyful daughter, was born with a rare birth condition that caused one side of her face to have unusual spots and markings, but she is a brilliant, loving little girl. Fury surged through me. I nearly shouted, "Did you just say my daughter would scare people?" My mom didn't back down. She raised her voice too. "Kaylee, you must understand. This is Amelia's special day. She wants everything to be perfect. Having Alice there could change the mood of the event." I felt like my world was crashing down. "You mean to tell me," I yelled, "that my child, your granddaughter, is a problem?" Still, my mother stood firm. "Kaylee, this wasn't an easy decision, but we have to think about Amelia and David. They deserve a day without distractions." The word distractions hit me like a bullet to the heart. "Distractions? Are you calling my daughter a distraction?" I screamed. She continued, "This might be better for Alice, too. She won't have to face uncomfortable stares from strangers." I couldn't take another word. I hung up. Sitting in my office, all I could think about was Alice, probably at preschool, painting, or playing with her friends who loved her just as she was. How could I explain to my 5-year-old that her family decided she didn't belong at a wedding? About 5 minutes later, I called Donald. As soon as he answered, I told him everything. He listened silently, but I could hear his breathing, heavy and uneven. When I finished, his voice was icy. "They said that about our daughter?" I repeated my mom's words. Each sentence felt like another slap. Donald inhaled sharply with each one, trying to contain his rage. Finally, he said, "Kaylee, I can't believe this. They're your family, and they're talking about Alice like she's something to be ashamed of. We have to do something. We have to protect her." His words gave me strength. I knew then I had to act decisively. After hanging up with Donald, I called my dad, hoping he'd see things differently. But when I asked him about it, he said, "Kaylee, this is Amelia's day. We need to respect her wishes." Next, I called Amelia herself. When she answered, I asked, "Can you explain why Alice isn't invited to your wedding?" There was a pause. Then she said, "You know, it's a formal event. I want everything to be perfect." "Perfect?" I asked. "And that doesn't include my daughter?" She hesitantly replied, "Please don't make me feel guilty. I've thought about this a lot." Lastly, I called Audrey, my last hope, but she said, "I get that you're upset, Kaylee. But this is Amelia's decision. We need to support her." After all those conversations, one heartbreaking truth hit me. Every single member of my family agreed to exclude my daughter. That night, while Alice slept peacefully in her room with her stuffed animals, Donald and I sat in the living room discussing everything, laying out a bigger plan. When we were done, I typed a short message and sent it to my mom. "I agree." Not even 5 minutes later, she replied, "You're a good daughter, Kaylee." Reading that message, I felt like I had just betrayed my child, but I knew I had made a decision that was going to change everything forever. Saturday morning, the day of Amelia's wedding, around 10 a.m. We were soaking in the sun on Daly Beach in Maui. Alice was near the shoreline, building a sandcastle, her laughter ringing out and blending with the gentle sound of the waves. Donald lay beside me on a lounge chair, his sunglasses hiding his eyes as he gazed at the endless blue ocean. We had arrived in Hawaii the day before after a long night of final conversations and one firm decision. Alice didn't know anything about being banned from the wedding. To her, this was just a surprise trip with Mom and Dad. something magical and spontaneous. As I enjoyed the warm sand beneath my feet and the soft Hawaiian sunlight, my phone started blaring from the beach bag. "Mom," flashed on the screen. I knew this call was coming. I picked up, already braced. Before I could speak, her voice exploded through the speaker, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "What did you do to Amelia's wedding?" I looked at the calm sea and replied calmly, "I didn't do anything. I just canceled the reception." Her voice cracked with rage. "Why would you do that? There are 80 guests here. Amelia's in tears." I stood up, walking a few steps away so Alice wouldn't hear. Then I said clearly and without hesitation, "My daughter took a vote, so the wedding's off." And with that, I ended the call. I powered down my phone entirely. I knew the calls would come, from my mom, Amelia, and every corner of the family, but I didn't need to hear any of it. A few seconds later, I returned to the lounge chair, not feeling regretful. Watching Alice laugh under the Hawaiian sun, I knew this was where she truly belonged, somewhere she was welcomed, loved, and seen, not hidden away like something to be ashamed of. At this point, you're probably wondering what happened, right? Let me tell you. A few days earlier, right after receiving the message from my mom that said, "Alice will stay home," I immediately called Michael. It was Tuesday evening. He was at the restaurant reviewing final preparations for Amelia's Saturday morning wedding reception. When he picked up, after a few quick greetings, I told him, "Michael, I need to cancel the wedding reception." There was a pause on the other end. Then he asked, "What happened? Did you find another venue?" Instead of giving a long explanation, I sent him a screenshot of the message from my mom. Then I told him everything, how my family believed Alice's presence would scare the guests and ruin the atmosphere. Michael was silent for a long moment. Then he said, steady and serious, "Kaylee, you did the right thing. I wouldn't have done anything different if I were in your shoes." I thanked him for understanding. I added, "I know canceling last minute causes losses. I'm ready to forfeit the entire deposit." Without missing a beat, Michael replied, "Don't worry about the money, Kaylee. Some things matter more." That night, I was surprised to receive a notification from my bank. The $10,000 deposit had been refunded to my account. I called Michael to ask about it. He said, "Kaylee, I have a daughter. If anyone ever called her a distraction at a family wedding, I'd do exactly what you just did." Right then, I understood what real friendship meant. And days later, sitting on a beach in Maui, watching Alice play joyfully, I knew I had made the right decision. My daughter deserved a family that embraced her and loved her as she was, not one that hid her away. After that call from my mom, Donald sat beside me and asked, "Kaylee, do you regret it?" I looked out at Alice, laughing as a big wave knocked over her sandcastle, and replied, "No, I only regret not doing this sooner." I knew then that the path ahead would look nothing like the one I used to dream of when I imagined a happy family. The 3 days in Maui passed like a beautiful dream. Alice built sandcastles on Noli Beach, giggling as tiny waves rolled in and washed them away. Donald and I sat under a beach umbrella, watching our daughter run and laugh on the soft white sand. Here, no one stared at Alice with discomfort or curiosity. The other travelers only saw a joyful little girl enjoying vacation with her parents. Sometimes she would run up to other children and play with them like it was the most natural thing in the world. But that peace didn't last long. 3 days later, we returned to Portland. I hadn't even brought the luggage into the house when I noticed 3 cars parked in front of our home. They were already waiting. Still sitting in the back seat, Alice was excitedly babbling about the colorful fish she saw while snorkeling, utterly unaware of the storm about to hit our doorstep. As I opened the car door, I saw them lined up on the porch like an angry battalion. Their faces were flushed with rage. Amelia was the first to approach, eyes red and swollen. She shouted, "Kaylee, do you even know what you've done?" I lifted Alice out of the car. She was still holding the stuffed bear we bought in Hawaii. I said calmly, "Keep your voice down. Alice is right here." Then my dad stepped forward, his face pale with anger. "Kaylee, do you know how much shame you've brought on this family?" My mom stood sobbing, shaking her head. "How could you be so cruel to your own family? Do you know how many guests were there? How much money was wasted?" Audrey looked at me with sheer contempt and said, "You destroyed the most important day of Amelia's life." I turned to Donald and told him to take Alice inside. But Amelia blocked our way and shouted, "No, I'm not finished. Do you know how humiliated I was?" 80 guests showed up to the Golden Oak, and I had to stand there and explain that my sister canceled the reception. I looked Amelia straight in the eye and said, "You want me to explain? That the family decided my daughter was too disruptive to be at your wedding?" Immediately, my dad stepped closer and pointed a finger at my face. It was the right decision. The right decision? Excluding Alice. The right decision? That made my blood boil, but I stayed composed. I stood tall and said firmly to them, "Let me make this clear. No one gets to touch my daughter or speak about her in any negative way. You are not part of our lives if you can't accept Alice." My dad moved as if to speak again, but I raised a hand to stop him. In a steady, final tone, I said, "You have 3 minutes to leave this property. If not, I'm calling the police." Seeing my resolve, my dad sneered. "Calling the cops on your own family? You've lost your mind." Without another word, I pulled out my phone and began dialing 911. That was enough. They turned and left. 2 days after my family stormed away from our house, I sat alone in my home office with a final decision. I opened my phone and drafted a message to Amelia. Every word was carefully chosen. Void of emotion, just plain, hard truth. You have 30 days to repay the $10,000 borrowed at the end of 2022. If you fail, I will involve legal counsel, and you will be responsible for all associated legal fees. After hitting send, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I didn't even fully realize I'd been carrying. That same day, I scheduled a meeting with my company's CEO to request a transfer to the new branch in Los Angeles, almost 900 miles from Portland. When I finished my proposal, Mr. Martin, the CEO, nodded in understanding and said, "Kaylee, we've been looking for someone experienced to lead the LA team. How soon can you start?" I responded without hesitation. "As soon as possible, sir." 3 days later, I received the official transfer email. The moment it hit my inbox, I contacted a real estate agent. I asked them to put our Portland home on the market and help us find a new place in Los Angeles. At the same time, I also canceled my current phone number. When that process was complete, I felt like I had severed the last lingering thread to a life I no longer wanted to be tied to. It was a difficult choice, but I knew it was right because Alice deserved a new environment, free from the toxic grip of the family that had turned their backs on her. Donald understood everything I was going through. One night, after Alice had fallen asleep, he sat beside me and said, "Kaylee, I know this wasn't an easy decision, but Alice deserves a new beginning." I nodded and told him, "We're protecting our daughter. She needs to grow up where no one can ever hurt her." And at that moment, I realized leaving Portland wasn't about running away. It was about choosing a better future for our little family. 3 months have passed since I decided to change my family's life forever. 3 months since I chose to protect my daughter, instead of keeping peace with the people who once called themselves family. 3 months since I understood that real love sometimes demands painful choices. I'm sitting in our little backyard in Los Angeles, watching Alice laugh and run around with her new friends. Her eyes sparkle like they did when we first got here. There are no more innocent questions about why Grandma doesn't like her. No more moments of self-doubt about the way she looks. Here, Alice is entirely accepted. She has friends, neighbors who adore her, a life, an ordinary, beautiful life a 5-year-old child deserves. Donald sometimes asks me if I have any regrets, and my answer has always been the same. I regret not doing this sooner. But today I want to ask you, the one who's listened to this story all the way through. What would you have done? What would you do if your family decided your child wasn't fit to attend an important family event? If they said her presence would make guests uncomfortable? If they voted to exclude a 5-year-old from her own family? Would you have done what I did? Canceled your sister's wedding reception? Or would you have swallowed your pride, brought your daughter anyway, and hoped things would somehow work themselves out? Do you believe protecting your child is more important than preserving peace with your family? I know not everyone will agree with my decision. Some may say I overreacted, that I ruined my sister's most important day over something that could have been handled differently. But I also know there are people out there who understand. Sometimes, being a parent means making the hard call to protect your child, even if it means standing alone. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear what you think. And if this story touched something in you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Thank you for listening to my story. Kaylee,